If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy. Download and subscribe at BeBullish.com.
We all love a legendary comeback, and Degree Original Cool Rush is back and better than ever. Cool Rush isn't just a scent, it's a movement, a fan favorite that delivers bold, fresh vibes and all-day sweat protection. Whether you have a man that spends hours in the gym, heads into the office early, or is just trying to stay fresh on a long day, Cool Rush has their back. Head to your local Walmart or Target and grab Degree Cool Rush, the fan favorite scent from the world's #1 antiperspirant brand.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg, Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia, and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. With us is Eric Levine, noted commentator, attorney, and essayist, our co-host. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and today we have two very important and interesting guests joining us. First, we have Peter Ruff, a expert on foreign policy, particularly on Europe and Russia, the whole Ukraine situation. He is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, a former advisor to President Bush, and we've had him on before. Peter, you always have wonderful, insightful things for us. So I turn you over to Eric. The topic, obviously, is what's going on with the Ukraine, what's going on with Russia. As we walked into the studio today, there was an announcement by President Trump that in a couple of weeks he expects to have a meeting with Putin. He's sending out a delegation headed by Secretary of State Rubio and others to meet with high-level Russian people. He was very optimistic with the call, started talking to him about trade deals when the war with Ukraine is over. My problem, and I turn this over to Eric and to you and to Jesse, my problem with this, I've heard these optimistic riffs from President Trump before. I don't trust Putin. I don't trust his mental stability. I don't trust his moral or lack of moral compass. I think he promises the world on a phone call, and then the next thing you know, he's killing innocent civilians. Eric.
So, Peter, welcome back.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Our pleasure. So anybody who knows me will tell you that I generally judge the wisdom of an individual by the degree to which they agree with me. So suffice it to say, Peter is a very, very, very wise man. So let's start from that premise. So, Peter, what is the status of the war in Ukraine? I mean, we've all been focused on Gaza for now. People have been distracted from what's going on in Ukraine. Where are we?
Well, I would say on the military front, there have not been dramatic changes. There still is a grinding, I'd almost say attritional war taking place in the so-called Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainians have built what is commonly referred to as a fortress belt of defensive lines, which the Russians continue to pound away at. The Russians have made incremental gains. They continue to do that, and they have achieved no great strategic breakout. So they're still pushing away, plugging away, taking enormous losses. And I would say if you and I were speaking a few months ago on the show, we probably have a similar assessment. So the action has been less on the military front and more so on the political level, where there have been changes, and as was just noted, pretty dramatic ones, for example, with the president's call today with his Russian counterpart.
So absent these political changes, what's Putin's strategy? Is it just to wait out Ukraine and Europe and just hope they give up? Because, as you point out, incremental change for this kind of expense to your economy, to the killing of your own people, how does he win in his mind?
Well, he has been promised breakouts and breakthroughs in his own system repeatedly, and the Russian military hasn't managed to meet any of those schedules. For example, take a town which has been in the news a lot, the city called Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine. The Russians were supposed to take it this time last year, and they still haven't taken it, even though they're trying to knock on the door and ultimately envelop and take the city. So I think these incremental gains truly frustrate Putin, but in his thinking, he is a much larger, stronger player than President Zelensky, commands more resources, more manpower. And so slowly but surely, he's chipping away at the problem. And eventually, he, I think, hopes to achieve a breakout. So if he can manage to get through that fortress belt into the central plains of Ukraine, maybe there's a breakthrough moment that he sees somewhere on the horizon. Secondly, I think he sees political disunity and division at times in the West, or the opportunity to pull the West away from President Zelensky. And Ukraine has to borrow American and European power to stay in the fight because, as I mentioned earlier, they simply are the smaller player in this one-on-one battle with Russia. So that basically means that Putin is plugging away, surely frustrated, but thinks that he can either push Europe and the U.S. away from the support for Ukraine or eventually achieve some sort of breakthrough that leads to a broader breakout and potentially a run on some of Ukraine's larger cities. But he hasn't achieved it yet, and if he assesses that the pain is too large, that eventually he has to cry uncle, then maybe he is prepared to go into negotiation. We just have not reached that point yet.
So do you think that the overflight of NATO countries with drones and other military hardware, I can't for a moment believe it's by accident, so the alternative to that, of course, it's intentional. Is that designed to dishearten NATO in his mind, or to broaden the war, or what? What explains his intentionally flying drones over Romania and Poland?
It's a good question. There's a lot of debate in our own intelligence community about those incidents, but the number of them in a pretty compressed time frame suggests that there is intention to it. I think there were probably 2 or 3 reasons for why the Russians, in the most dramatic incident, which is the overflight of Polish territory, including drones, even though if they were merely decoys deep into Polish airspace. I think the explanation for those is probably that, one, the Russians are holding their major military exercises. These are not even annual exercises. They take place every 4 or 5 years. The Zapad exercises, they're meant to simulate and test a war with the West. And so in anticipation of that exercise, which kicked off a couple of days after that incident, they wanted to, I think, test potentially American radars in Europe, Western response moves, and by and large get some military utility out of it. Secondly, it was at a time of heightened discussion about sanctions against Russia, and there was a European team in Washington to meet with their counterparts at the Treasury Department and elsewhere to talk about next steps potentially against the Russians on sanctions, as President Trump's frustration was at a boil. And so that, too, I think, was something of a brushback pitch to hurt and hit the Europeans. And then third, it distracts a little bit from some of the failings in the Donbass, some of the weaknesses in the Russian campaign, because Putin's narrative at home is that he's fighting a war not just against Ukraine, or else how could he not win, but against the entire West. And that justifies the huge losses which the Russians are taking. So in that sense, some sort of hybrid campaign, gray zone operation against NATO partners fits into the propaganda that's being fed to the Russian population at home. So I think all those factors combined, it's very interesting if you look at who is targeted, who has been targeted in these. These are crucial states on the Eastern Front, like the Romanians and Poles, who have been very important supporters of Ukraine. And it also includes, like, for example, the Danes, a country that has really been at the lead in purchasing weaponry for Ukraine and sending their own stockpiles to Kyiv and buffing up European political support for the Ukrainians. And in that sense, it was a shot across the bow. But he'd also like to exacerbate some political divisions in Europe. Others who are skeptical of support for Ukraine in the European political scene will say, look what you were doing. You were simply leading us down the dangerous path to war. So it's an intimidation as well, meant to divide European politics, to ultimately get Europe away from supporting Ukraine, at which point he can basically turn it into a fait accompli.
So obviously Putin is watching very carefully what's going on in other parts of the world, in particular, I guess, Gaza. Is there any lesson for him to learn? Do you think this in part explains why he's willing to meet with Rubio down the road? Is there any lesson for him that he may have learned about American willingness to use its military power and flex its military muscle in the Middle East that may have changed his calculus?
Well, I think the first dynamic or implication of the Gaza settlement for Ukraine is the factor of time. The U.S. president can only turn his attention to so many issues at one time. And now that he being President Trump, has a framework in place in the Middle East, he can train his sights more squarely on the war in Ukraine. So after a trip to Egypt and Israel the last couple of days, there's now a beehive of activity around Ukraine. President Zelensky will be in Washington tomorrow. His senior aides are already here preparing the groundwork for that Oval Office meeting. And as we just discussed in the long phone call, apparently it was over 2 hours between Presidents Trump and Putin, the Rubio preparatory visit or meetings with his Russian counterparts, followed by a presidential level meeting in Budapest, is being prepared. So the time factor matters. As to other parallels, there are questions of strategies. To get the agreement in the Middle East, President Trump utilized what I would describe as classic coercive diplomacy. Israel hit Hamas hard. It demonstrated through its Gaza City operation that the hostages weren't going to save Hamas from destruction. And in turn, Hamas calculated that it would be better off striking the deal that President Trump put before them, including with the presidential warning to accept the offer or else. But, in the Middle East, Hamas was weaker than our ally in Israel. The challenge in Europe is that Russia is a major nuclear power astride the Eurasian landmass. It is larger and more powerful than our partner, Ukraine. And Russia's major supporters in Iran and China and North Korea, not as easily swayed by U.S. diktat, U.S. discussions, U.S. diplomacy, whereas the major supporters of Hamas, Qatar and Turkey, for example, but then also others in the Arab world who are at least neutral, bending towards Hamas, or just neutral and want this to end, are very positively inclined towards listening to the president and taking advice from the U.S. And when they signaled to Hamas that the game was up, I think the Hamas had little choice but to strike the deal. So in that sense, there are differences between the Middle East situation and the European one. But power matters most. Coercion is important. And in that sense, the Europe is no different than the Middle East.
Jesse, questions for Peter?
Peter, thank you for your insight here. I was wondering, actually two questions. First, President Trump's suggestion to NATO allies that they should shut down any of the drone incursions that are in their airspace. That on top of the talk of Tomahawks being shipped and provided to Ukraine, which could certainly, everyone has been saying it would be a game changer. How do you believe internally that is being received by Putin and his military establishment?
I think those are probably two different case studies. When it comes to the shoot down of drones, I mean, there is a clear distinction between NATO and Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But it isn't lost on anyone that Ukraine has been fighting alone in terms of its men dying in Ukraine for the better part, or actually more than 3 years now. And so I think any ally will be very judicious and circumspect and careful in engaging Russia, especially if it's a manned system. I mean, there have been violations of Estonian airspace by Russian fighters, unless it believes that it has the backup of the U.S. So they think about the escalatory ladder prior to taking such a decision to begin with. An unmanned Russian drone, especially a decoy drone, I think poses kind of a different case for NATO leaders. But the president's saying he's willing to or thinks go ahead, shoot it down. It reminds me a little bit of 2015 when the Turks shot down an actual manned Russian fighter jet. That was a major incident because, of course, that it's different shooting at an unmanned versus manned fighter jet. But I think it's very vintage sort of President Trump, and that he opens the aperture, and the range of policy options are pretty broad. And so he's willing to just say something like that at the UN General Assembly when pressed by a reporter in ways that I think you had much more narrowed policy discussions with somebody like President Biden. As for the Tomahawks, I think that really, unlike kind of the defensive move of shooting down a weapon or a system that's over NATO territory, providing Ukraine the Tomahawks that can fire deep into Russia really, I think, puts up the antennas of the Russians and gets their attention. The British have provided Kyiv with the Storm Shadow, which is an air-launched cruise missile. The French have provided the so-called Scalp, which is their variant. We provided so-called ATACMS missiles, but the range of these is in the hundreds of miles. The Tomahawk is in the high hundreds of miles, and it begins to put, fuel depots, air bases, tank factories. The famous Russian drone plant in Tatarstan, which is hundreds of miles east of Moscow, in range. This is where the Iranians build the Russians build their Iranian-designed Shahid drones. So that, I think, is surely something that Putin wants to prevent, and I'm fairly confident that it's something he would have brought up on the call today with the president.
So, Peter,
one more follow-up, if I might. It's been about 2 weeks since President Trump spoke at the General Assembly of the United Nations, and there he said to the European nations that they should not purchase fossil fuels from Russia, which is fueling or is funding their war against Ukraine. In the interim period, have you seen any changes in Europe's consumption of fuels from Russia, or any discussions to do that? Has there been any change, basically, is my question, from that statement from the president to his European allies and action regarding the acquisition of fossil fuel from Russia?
There have been negotiations once President Trump raised this between Europe and the U.S., and the Europeans have moved up the final date by which they will end their purchases of Russian hydrocarbons. But I would just note, this while still significant, this is a relatively small amount compared to where in 2022 the Europeans were, and it pales in comparison to Chinese and Indian purchases of Russian energy. So there are still piped oil heading to Hungary and Slovakia, which are relatively small economies. They asked for an exemption from the EU decision to end purchases of Russian oil, and the European Commission has urged President Trump to make clear to Bratislava and Budapest, where there are two leaders who are positively inclined towards him, that this should end and that they should look for an alternative. There's LNG still going to a few select countries, the Netherlands, France. Some of that travels onward into Germany. So I suppose you could say the Germans are somewhat implicated in this. But Europe has really wound down, and I understand there might even be additional talks underway about speeding up that wind down their purchases of Russian energy in recent years. And the president's statement at UNGA wasn't just Europe. He said NATO, which would include Turkey. And the Turks are significant purchases of Russian hydrocarbons. So that's another threshold or barrier that we'd have to cross to eventually achieve that goal. If he hooked his own, or the president hooked his own sanctions decisions to Europe going all the way down to zero, then the Europeans would counter, well, the U.S. should end purchases of Russian fertilizers, for example, and other examples where we're still slightly on the hook. So my argument has been that we should try to move in lockstep and set the same standard across the board. And there are probably other areas where the U.S. could do more, and then where Europe could do more. But really, the main player, the main issue is still, I'd say, China and to a lesser extent, India.
Peter, we have to take a hard break. I want to thank you very much on behalf of Chairman Garcia, Eric Levine, and myself for that insightful analysis of the Ukraine-Russian situation. As these meetings take place between Secretary Rubio and his group with high-level Russian personnel, as well as a follow-up meeting with the presidents, Putin and Trump, would like to bring you back to get your analysis of those.
My pleasure.
As well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Peter. And once again, you are very wise.
Well, that's because,
Thanks, Eric.
Eric is sitting here nodding in agreement. That's why. All right. Thanks again. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted commentator, attorney, and essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We'll be back in a moment with more interesting and important conversation. Please stay with us.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor, like the steam fitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage theft, and daily working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana4DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Introducing Meta Ray-Ban Display, the world's most advanced AI glasses. With a full color display built into the lens of the glasses, it's there when you need it and gone when you don't. Send and receive messages, translate or caption live conversations, collaborate with Meta AI, and more. Be one of the first to try Meta Ray-Ban Display. Visit meta.com/Meta Ray-Ban Display to book a demo and find your pair.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. I want to switch gears. We just had Peter Ruff of the Hudson Institute talking about Ukraine and Russia and what's going to happen there. I want to raise the following point. And I'm deeply troubled. I'll tell you why I'm deeply troubled. I was very, very happy to see the hostages come back. That's a wonderful thing. I'm not a hero with other people's lives, and I understand the mentality of the Israelis. I understand the Jewish tradition about you don't leave your people behind and you rescue hostages. That's a long-standing Jewish tradition. This is the problem. They let out a couple of thousand of these savages from the jails, including terrorists and murderers, rapists, people who we know will plot and scheme against the state of Israel. So we have that going down. And so we get back to 20, and they're still playing around about the bodies coming back. And again, in the Jewish tradition, you just don't leave the body behind because you want to have so-called closure by a proper funeral for the deceased. I understand that. What I don't understand is this over-optimism on the part of the world community, including our president. This is what's going on right now as we speak in Gaza. Hamas is consolidating its forces. It's executing its own Gazan citizens who are political dissidents against Hamas. They're talking about having Qatar and Turkey going there and rebuilding and policing Gaza. I trust Qatar and Turkey not at all. I think the expectation that you can trust these people and they'll do the right thing and Israel will be protected, I think they're playing a long game. The American people, unfortunately, don't know how to play a long game. The game is always about immediate gratification, and Trump likes to take the victory lap, which is swell, and he's entitled to recognition for what he's done. But they'll wait out Trump. They'll wait out Trump until he leaves office, and then Turkey and Qatar and these other people in Iran will make their moves. And also you have reports that Iran is trying to make moves with third-party states, North Korea, Russia, China, with respect to nuclear weapons. So this is far from a wonderful picture, and I'm very, very concerned about this. Eric, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as you are.
Well, you should be. You're a Mets fan.
Oh my gosh!
Well, being a Mets fan just means I know how to deal with pain. But look, getting the hostages out was an extraordinary achievement. And let's also keep in mind, it isn't that there was a ceasefire and Israel withdrew. Israel is still in control of 53% of Gaza. They are still surrounding Hamas and Gaza City. Now, look, we always said, and we said this before, and we'll say it again, and this bears out what we were saying, Hamas never had any intention of laying down their weapons. I don't think anybody believed that they would. So by the Israelis withdrawing to the line where they currently are, they are perfectly positioned to go in and finish what they started. And now, when they go in and eliminate Hamas, they don't have to worry about the hostages' safety. They're out. Hamas has given up all their leverage. And what was also very good about the deal is that ostensibly by signing on to a Qatar and Turkey, who I agree with you are bad actors, their role in the deal is to say Hamas has to live up to the terms that they agreed to, which includes giving back the deceased. They've only given back 5 of the 28. And they announced yesterday that there are no more. They're not giving any more. And they're not laying down their arms, to your point, that they're attempting to consolidate their power by literally dragging collaborators or people they perceive as collaborators out of their homes and shooting them in the back of their head. Maybe that's their way of disarming, because if you use all your bullets, then eventually you're being disarmed.
Where are the protests in the United States of America against that kind of violence and that depravity? I must have missed that.
We will get to that. I mean, basically, the short answer to that is it was never about Gaza. It was never about the Palestinians. It was always about killing Jews. They wanted Israel to surrender. That's what those protests were about. They wanted Israel to surrender. So there's the short answer. Now that Israel has won, they don't really care if Gazans or Palestinians are gunned down. Anyway, back to the point. Qatar and Turkey are not going to be the countries overseeing the security and the day-to-day operation in Gaza. Turkey and Qatar played this role because they were concerned that if they had not forced the deal, then Israel would finish the job and Qatar and Turkey would have no role or say whatsoever in the rebuilding of Gaza. This was their only way of continuing to be relevant in Gaza. So they signed on. But what they signed on to was that Hamas had to surrender. Now, in addition to that, Trump made clear within the last, I think, 36 hours that he's getting impatient with Hamas, that they need to lay down their weapons, that by no uncertain terms they have to live up to that part of the bargain. Otherwise, the Israelis are going to be able to go back with Americans' full support. And in a certain circumstance, that's actually the best result, because that's really the only way to guarantee the hostages are out, and this is really the only way to guarantee that Hamas never comes back to power. Israel obliterates them. So that actually, in my judgment, is a pretty good result. But back to your point for a second regarding where are the protesters. You know, we're on the cusp of an election in the mayoralty. Zoran Mamdani continues to be the leading candidate and is likely to win unless Curtis Sliwa does the right thing and gets out. And I encourage everyone to encourage Curtis to get out. He has no chance of winning. All he can do is succeed in frustrating Cuomo's efforts to win, guaranteeing that Mamdani will win. So Curtis, get out. But in any event, if anyone has been paying attention to what Mamdani's been saying, since the ceasefire, he has nothing bad to say about Hamas. When he asked if they should lay down their arms, and stop shooting people in the head, all he could say is, in response to that, is, you know what, I'm only focusing on what's good for the people of New York. But somehow he can continue to say that Israel's committing a genocide, Israel is continuing to engage in forced starvation.
And he will attempt to arrest
and he will attempt to arrest Netanyahu. How that relates to the people of New York while calling on Hamas to disarm does not, of course, is anybody's guess. Look, there's an expression that the Arabs use regarding Israel's Day of Independence. They call it the Nakba, the disaster. We are on the cusp of having a Nakba here in New York. Mamdani's going to be elected. If Curtis doesn't get out, Curtis, get out. But you're going to have a guy who hates Jews, seeks the destruction of the state of Israel, and is a communist. But to your point, Richard, about where are the protesters, just coming full circle, it was never about caring about the Palestinian people or justice, because at a minimum, you would think that these people that were concerned about starvation in Gaza, which of course was a lie and never occurred, they would be concerned about the 500,000 people that were starved to death in Sudan. But you don't hear about that because they don't care. The goal has always been killing Jews and destroying Israel. And the best way for Israel to make sure that doesn't happen and to safeguard their security is they're going to have to finish the job. They're at 53% of Gaza. They're going to take 100. And once they finish with Hamas, then the rebuilding can start.
Jesse, your thoughts?
I completely agree with Eric.
What about me?
I guess I'm just like Peter.
What about
me? You're partially right. You're partially right.
Here's where I was going to get to you because that's more of my focus in my discussions. I think that Israel is poised to finish the job. There is a discussion, there is a theory and a plan out there that if they do not comply with the second part of this deal, it does allow for Israel to move forward as it must and defend itself, and as it should. But let's go to Qatar and Turkey. I completely agree with you. I think that these are players that we cannot trust. They're players that, you may say that the United States is not in there for a long game and that Qatar and Turkey are. The one other entity that is in there for the long game is Israel. And I suspect that any part of this deal that moved forward and was part of this had to have Netanyahu's approval. And in doing so, a redundancy and a backup plan in the event that something fell aside or was violated. So I have faith in Qatar and Turkey and whatever role they have. And I think Eric is right. They had to, for public facing, they needed to play a role in this and not be left at the train station. But the fact that Israel has signed off on that, and Israel now has the ability to do what it needs to do where at the perimeter and where they're stationed, I think they are the long game. We can say Americans are not the long game, Europe is not the long game, and all that stuff. But I do believe the counterweight to that long game is Israel.
Well, this is the problem.
There's only one problem.
This is the problem with respect to Gaza. This is seen as an opportunity for Qatar and Turkey and indeed Iran to reestablish themselves, to consolidate, get intelligence information.
I just don't agree with that.
Well, okay. Look, I believe me, I want to be wrong.
And you are.
I think everyone fully expects them to try. The issue is, will they be successful in accomplishing that?
100%.
I mean, this peace accord that was signed in Egypt, I mean, you have all those Arab nations there that are participating and are part of this, and now are breathing a sigh of relief because these issues have been addressed for them. They still have the Muslim Brotherhood. They still have those issues that they're dealing with. But those Arab countries are now also have skin in the game.
Right. Keep in mind this just isn't a quote unquote Arab-Israeli conflict. This is more a Muslim Brotherhood, moderate Sunni issue. And so the UAE and Saudi Arabia want Hamas obliterated because the Muslim Brotherhood poses an existential threat to their regimes.
But Turkey and Qatar have been supporting these clans.
I understand, but Turkey and Qatar have also signed on to an agreement that requires them to surrender, and if they don't surrender, it allows Israel to go back and finish the job. So what are they going to do? They say we don't agree anymore. It's not like Qatar and Turkey are going to send troops into the middle of this. That's never going to happen. They're not going to be the ones to disarm Hamas. And if the Israelis go in and start finishing up what they started, as they should, Turkey and Qatar are not going to commit troops to fight the Israelis. That's just not going to happen. And Iran, this thing you continue to concern about, yes, we must always keep our eyes on Iran. There's perhaps the most evil regime on the face of the planet. There's no way the Israelis are going to allow the Iranians to reconstitute their missile defense system or their nuclear program. They will just be obliterated as they show up. I don't care if the Chinese bring it in. I don't care if the Russians bring it in. I don't care if P.T. Barnum and Bailey Circus brings it in. The Israelis are going to blow it up before they're allowed to be operative.
Jesse, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, to your point, Your Honor, about waiting out Trump. There's like 3 years and 3 months left, or 2 months left in his presidency. That aspect is right. That's why the 2028 elections are going to be critical, not just for American interests, but American interests abroad, especially in the Middle East, to ensure that we have someone that's like-minded, that's someone that has the same diplomatic and the chutzpah to do what Donald Trump did, to finally bring this warring region to a peace deal and obliterate Hamas.
Yeah, but Israel's not going to wait 3 years for Hamas. They're going to wait. They maybe wait 3 weeks. I mean, this is not going to go on very long.
Listen, gentlemen, I hope you're both right. I'm always concerned about the cycles of history and of politics. And the last thing this country needs and Western civilization needs is another Obama, another Biden in the White House selling out American interests and Western civilization.
Well, exactly right. And the Israelis are aware of that as well. And they're not going to wait for another Obama or Biden to get into the White House for them to finish their job.
Amen for the House Democrat. Thank you so much.
Which House Democrat, me or him? All right. This is Eric. I knew you were a Mets fan, but a Democrat, my God, who knew?
No, I think that's you. You're the House Democrat.
I'm the House Democrat. All right. So this is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the county chair of the Republican Party out in Suffolk County, the vice chair of the state Republican Party, noted commentator, attorney, essayist, and Republican, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're going to be trying to get a hold of Dr. Marc Siegel, a distinguished professor at NYU Medical School, a distinguished commentator on Fox, contributed to WABC News with us here on Katz and Cosby on a regular basis. And we'll be talking to Dr. Siegel about some very important and interesting questions. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana. This episode is brought to you by CBS. DMV is a brand new workplace comedy turning misery into magic and chaos into comedy. Starring Harriet Dyer and Tim Meadows, DMV is here to serve you laughs. Watch Mondays at 8:30, 7:30 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
You don't technically need this car. You say that out loud to yourself. You say, I have no space. You say, I'm just looking. Then you click. Then you zoom in on photo number 87 and whisper, oh no. Then you text a friend, the one who always enables you. You say to yourself, this is the last one, knowing it is not. You don't need this car. But maybe, just maybe, this car needs you. Bring a trailer. It's never just a car.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and joining us now is my very good friend, Dr. Marc Siegel. Dr. Marc Siegel is the senior medical analyst for Fox News, is a distinguished professor at NYU Medical School, has his own radio show with NYU. He's the author of a great new book, a bestseller called The Miracles Amongst Us, and we'll talk to him about that in a little while. It's one of many books that Dr. Siegel has written. Dr. Siegel, welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you here.
Great to be on with you, Judge. Thank you for having me.
So these are the things I want to talk to you about, and then I'll turn you over to the good offices of Eric and Jesse. This is what I'm concerned about. I want to get your thoughts on the following. Your thoughts about the hostage deal, your thoughts about the impact on the returned hostages, that some 20 people who came back, their emotional and physical impacts on them and the issues they will have. And then the large question I really am concerned about is what Hannah Arendt talked about when she was following the Eichmann trial, banality of evil, what otherwise so-called normal people do when there's no moral constraints. So let's begin with, what are your thoughts about the hostage deal?
You know, you gave it a great intro because one of the things I've been implying as I discuss it, and I talk about all of the damage, physical and emotional damage to the hostages, one of the messages that's implied by what I'm saying is who would do this? Who would do this and why would they do this? And the banality of evil is palpating there. And it's very important to be talking about that from a purely political point of view before I get to the medical point of view, because people tend to be apologists in these situations and say, there's a negotiation going on between two groups. Well, wait a minute. One group of mass murderers with no morality and another group trying to protect their country who is put into a situation of war when they gave back this land, or they gave this land to the Palestinian people who then voted in this terrorist group. So we have to talk about it for two reasons. One, the horror of what the hostages are going through and what it means to their families to have them back and whether they can ever have a normal life again. And two, who would do this? We certainly focused on the depravity of October 7th, 2023. And that was clear enough, murdering people, raping people, dismembering people, raping and then murdering people. Now you see what's been done to the hostages, where they've been living, a lot of them, in complete depravity, no light, in tunnels, chained together to go to the bathroom with diarrhea, eating incredibly little amounts of food, being beaten, untended wounds, fractures, gunshot wounds, shrapnel, people with underlying medical conditions that went untreated, including asthma, starvation, prominent. And when they come to light, literally come to light, and Sheba Medical Center is leading the way here with 10 out of the 20 hostages, it can't be fixed. I mean, right away, you try to slowly return a state of nutrition. That takes weeks. You can't just feed people. You have to slowly alter body chemistry so it allows for food. Warmth and love and kindness and compassion and multi-teamed approach, all really important. The kidneys are going to be damaged, the liver, the brains, the hearts, all have to be tended to, broken bones fixed, bullets, all of this. And then on top of everything else, even when you stabilize somebody physically, there's an enormous emotional toll here. Post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, depersonalization, hallucinations, all go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, no matter how much love these people get. They may be smiling and hugging each other, but they're suffering greatly and deeply. And it's an absolute testament to the horror of the people that inflicted this.
And what do we do about this in terms of worldwide public opinion? It seems everybody's forgotten about the horrors of October 7th, and they've turned this into an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel campaign where the hearts and minds of people all across the world are against the Jewish people and against Israel, as somehow they are the aggressors. How do you deal with that issue, Dr. Siegel?
Luckily, and I mean this in quotes, luckily, there appears to be an economic incentive here to rid the area of Hamas, because I think people understand that murder doesn't go well with making money. So, Jared Kushner's done an incredible job with this. I mean, he needs to get a lot of spotlights. He built the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accords, that whole region has made a lot more money because of the Abraham Accords. This whole Hamas horror monstrosity puts it at risk. And so for there to be peace in the region is going to mean a lot more wealth. And that's why I think that the Arab neighbors are on behalf of this. So that there's a growing distrust of Hamas and a growing distaste of Hamas in the region. Make no mistake about it. That's not pro-Jewish. That's pro-money.
Eric.
So I just want to shift gears for a second, domestically. So Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has declared war on autism. And in so doing, he's taken on Tylenol and vaccinations. I was curious about your view on his efforts.
I have a good relationship with him, and I speak to him all the time. And he's pretty open-minded with me, and he brings data to me and information that I process, and then I look more deeply into it. But I'm concerned. I'm positively inclined towards the focus on pregnancy and autism, because I thought that the focus on early childhood was too late. Neuroimaging studies are showing that the changes in the brain of fetuses is where to look. I think way too little attention has been paid to the idea of mutations that occur to elderly parents having kids for the first time. That's clearly increasing the autism rate. I think environmental factors and environmental toxins probably play a role as triggers. I think that is a right place to look. But I call some of what's been happening in A plus B does not equal D. I mean, it's fair to say acetaminophen in animals can be a toxin to the liver, and it's fair to say that fetuses don't have fully developed liver, and it's fair to say that 3 grams a day, which was the recommended adult dose, probably way too much for pregnant women. But you can't go from there to saying that Tylenol causes autism. There's 5 steps in between. It's never been shown. And the study out of Scandinavia in 2024 looked at 2.5 million siblings, did not show an association. The study that launched this statement was one that Harvard School of Public Health, UCLA was involved in, and Mount Sinai in New York. Unfortunately, the head of that study and the judge is going to love this if he doesn't already know it, the head of that study has appeared on behalf of the plaintiff in Tylenol trials. So I don't know how objective he is. I think that study is valuable, though. So I think that the jury is out on this, and it was premature to be making those conclusions, especially with no cause and effect shown.
Okay. Jesse.
Dr. Siegel, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you. I mean, we do sometimes see each other over the summer at breakfasts. What I want to do is just talk about your new book that's coming out, The Miracles Among Us. I guess there's always been this, from a layman like myself, there's always been this conflict or this competition between faith and science. But you in this book really, truly bring together, it reminds us of God's love and its capacity and how its role is in medicine and in healing. As a man of faith, and I do believe that you could have good science and good faith together. Can you talk a little bit about the stories that you share in The Miracles Among Us that shows how faith and God plays a role and directly in the healing of many of our neighbors and individuals' cases that you've seen?
You framed that perfectly, because I think my point in the book is there's a lot of doctors that are people of faith and people of science, and then they go from putting their gloves on when they see a patient, and then maybe they go to synagogue or church, but they have like church and state separation, literally, and it doesn't need to be the case, because physicians are the hands of God. Great technology is the hands of God. And the way I define miracle in this book brings it all together, because a miracle is an accumulation of coincidences or events or happenings that are unexpected. I call it being in the miracle lane. you're in the miracle lane and you don't even know what the miracle is, but the outcome ends up being unexpected, unanticipated. It's really important to look at things this way so that you don't write patients off too soon, so that you don't underestimate the power of prayer, whether it's from divine intervention or just as a piece of the puzzle here, that it can be great science and great faith at the same time. I got some examples, and my publisher always said to me in these stories, and the stories are wonderful. Some of them almost told themselves. Some of them, I wrote every word of the book, but some of them almost told themselves. But what she would say to me is, "What's the miracle in this chapter?" And I would laugh and say back to her, "Lisa, there's 10. There's 10." And they're usually not the ones you expect. I think my favorite one today takes place in Sudan, where Tom Katina, who's known as the Albert Schweitzer of Sudan, he's a family practitioner performing surgery on over 1,000 cases a year. And a little girl comes to him, and he sees on a CAT scan that she has cancer of both kidneys. And he has to take out 1.5 kidneys. And he says, "I've never done a partial nephrectomy before. How am I going to do it?" And there's another family practitioner visiting him from D.C., and he says, "Well, go on the Internet, get an instruction video." He says, "The Internet hasn't worked here in months. Are you kidding?" So the other doctor goes over and bangs on the computer, and the Internet comes on. That's miracle number one. And they're operating with bellows and ancient anesthesia, and they find a Polish video that tells them how to do a partial nephrectomy. They don't speak a word of Polish, any of them. And somehow they hear enough of the video with equipment they don't even have before it crashes down, before the video crashes, and they try to do the surgery from a language they don't speak with partial information with non-surgeons, and they manage to cut away half the kidney on the affected kidney. The little girl lives, comes back 2 years later totally cured.
That is a miracle. That's absolutely amazing.
That is great.
And it's the accumulation of all of the coincidences there that makes a miracle. But I can go on. I have a miracle on October 7th. I have one about the Rebbe.
What's the miracle about October 7th?
So October 7th, there was a family with a doctor named Alei Hogag Golan and her husband Ariel and a child that was 18 months old, and the child they were all burned. The house was burned to the ground by Hamas, and they hid in the safe room, and they managed to escape through the window naked, covered with burns. And then they hid over a tractor where they were infected by fungus that was in the soil. And the little baby almost died from the burns, but the mother, who was a physician, an anesthesiologist, breastfed the baby and managed to keep her alive. And they limped out. When Hamas looked like they were leaving, they limped out to the front of the kibbutz and found IDF there. And they got airlifted by helicopter to Sheba Medical Center, where she was in a coma for 60 days. She had blood clots. She had infections. She had COVID. The whole family had COVID. And burns all over her body, inhalation burns. An angel looked over her in the ICU named Yael, the same name as her daughter, who had saved so many during COVID. And she managed to survive and awaken and was in so much pain from these burns. Months of rehabilitation later, she goes back to being an anesthesia resident. They said, "Please come here to Sheba. We need you here. We saved you." She said, "No, I'm going back to Soroka, where I started my internship." And she goes back home, and her family goes back home. And she's absolutely a hero. But she says to me, Judge, I don't want this to be called a miracle, because if you call this a miracle, you're dishonoring the people who didn't make it.
Wow. So
very moving.
That's absolutely incredible. The name of the book is The Miracles Amongst Us. It's by our good friend, Dr. Marc Siegel, noted commentator, senior medical analyst at the Fox News, often a commentator and a contributor on Katz and Cosby, which I'm honored to serve as a co-host on every night, Monday through Friday. So as you step back and you look at the world in which we're living in, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic?
I think we need healing. I think that the world needs to be healed, and I think that the spirit of what I just shared with you is part of that healing.
But I agree we need healing, but do you think humankind is taking a path towards destruction, or are we taking a path to reconciliation and redemption?
Right now we're heading for destruction, but Cardinal Dolan said something to me, and he also gave me my idea for miracles, which is they're soft miracles, and I've told you them today on the show. Combination of technology and faith. But Dolan said something brilliant. He said, we got to stop hating each other. We can disagree on ideas. You can hate an idea someone else has, but stop hating the person who has the idea. And, this group, and Judge Weinberg specifically, has been an inspiration to me and many others in that regard, called the common sense Democrat. It doesn't matter if he's a Democrat, if he's a Republican. He's a man of ideas, but a man of love.
Well, Dr. Siegel, I want to thank you for that spontaneous declaration of support. I expect you to give affidavits.
We'll see how many people share that.
Give the affidavits to Eric Levine and Jesse Garcia, my esteemed friends and
Eric
co-hosts.
and Jesse are great also. Eric and Jesse are great also. They get the same sentiment.
Well, there you go. And this is not yet an award-winning show, but it's a record show in terms of audience. We have devoted people who listen to us all the time, and they can't listen to us on Sundays between 6 and 7. They listen to the podcast. We're a very highly rated show across New York City and New York State, and indeed across the country. And it's because of people like you, Dr. Siegel, who bring wisdom and experience and a love of humanity. I want to thank you.
It was terrific. Thank you.
I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Siegel. Good luck on the book. This is one of several books you have. Every time you write a book, there's more wisdom and knowledge to be imparted to the community.
This is my favorite because we've all had miracles. We've all witnessed them. We've all experienced them. Come forth and bring me your miracle. It's a very uplifting book.
Thank you. On behalf of Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted commentator, attorney, essayist Eric Levine, I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, thanking Dr. Siegel for joining us today. Please stay with us. Next week, we'll be back on Let the Record show. As always, God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America. Thank you for listening. Look forward to being with you again next week on Let the Record show.
Thanks for listening to Let the Record Show with Judge Weinberg, Chairman Jesse Garcia, and Eric Levine. You can hear Let the Record Show Sunday mornings at 6. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.
You know the words that dominate our news cycle.
Private equity keeps inventing
generative artificial
capital
gains tax on home.
America's chip fueled by market volatility. Bets on Fed rate cuts.
But do you truly understand how they impact your world and your wallet? In a world that skims the what, understand the why. Because context changes everything. Subscribe to learn more at Bloomberg.com, the global benchmark for business news.